County. This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
And welcome everyone, RTV Sports Rap back here in the month of March. We're in the home stretch here of the Attack Rap and RTV Sports Rap season. Spencer Byers, and now joining me, JC Coots, of course, the host of Bear Tracker Weekly, as well, of course, as the color commentator for the Attack broadcasts. And JC, obviously, the Attack season is coming quickly to a close. We're in the last month of the regular season before the playoffs start on, I believe, March 26th is the first day of the postseason here in the OHL. The NHL has still hasn't hit the trade deadline. That comes on Friday. So as we record this, only one trade really gone down for the trade deadline, and that was the Oilers and Chicago making a swap. Connor Murphy going from Chicago to Edmonton for a second-round pick, which in my mind is a little too rich. We'll get into that in a second. But JC, with the trade deadline coming so quickly in the NHL, and obviously with that big month-long pause because of the Olympics, causing a lot of issues, I think, around the league for teams trying to figure out who they are and what guys are going to be healthy coming out of the Olympics and what guys are going to be healthy, not going to the Olympics and getting a chance to have a month just, be able to rehab and get themselves right. So kind of going into the deadline, what are your expectations with a couple of days left before the deadline eventually closes?
I mean, no real expectations at this point. I think that there's a number of players that rank really high on the list of players likely to be moved. I think Nazem Kadri from Calgary is probably one of the top guys that could be moved. Vincent Trocheck from the Rangers, Blake Coleman of the Flames, Robert Thomas is a name that's been coming up a lot lately from St. Louis, Tyler Myers from Vancouver. Like, a lot of these teams are non-playoff teams. They're teams you expect are going to be sellers, and you're selling off players in a lot of cases of a certain vintage, or if their deals are coming to an end, or if they're facing, unrestricted free agency for the first time. So it's going to be interesting just to see which teams decide, okay, we're buyers, and which teams figure out, okay, I think we might have a chance. I mean, I am unapologetically a Senators fan. So I look at the standings right now. I look at how Ottawa's been playing as of late, and I think, they are right on that bubble of they could buy or sell. Anybody at this point below them in the Eastern Conference, looking at you, Toronto, Florida, Devils, Rangers, you're all probably sellers at this point. I mean, with Florida, I think we knew it was coming. Dynasties are hard to do. It's hard to do a three-peat with the Stanley Cup, but at some point that, things are going to come back. And now I think Florida's at a point where they might be taking a long look in the mirror, as might the Leafs. If you look over at the West, I think your cutoff line is probably right now LA. And then anybody below that, which would be Winnipeg, Calgary, Chicago, St. Louis, Vancouver, they're all likely to be sellers.
Well, let's get into the trade that has happened first before we talk about teams we think could be buyers or could be sellers there, JC. We'll start with Connor Murphy going to Edmonton. And again, it was a second-round pick in the swap. And I personally think that's a rather rich sum to give up by Stan Bowman and the Edmonton Oilers because, no offense to Connor Murphy, he isn't a blue chip player. And I guess maybe my expectations of yesteryear, maybe it's because I'm just remembering trades from when I was a little bit younger, maybe high school, even younger than that, or late elementary school, of second round picks were like really good players. Like, you were giving up that kind of draft capital for like top 4, top 2 defensemen or top 6 forwards that were going to make a real difference. And Connor Murphy, good PK guy, played like 18 minutes a night on a bad Chicago team. Like, that's not Seth Jones of last year, who made a move from Chicago to Florida, even though he was making so much money. He was their top defenseman. He was playing all those minutes. He was playing, I believe, PK and power play for them in Chicago. So I just don't particularly like the move for the capital, not necessarily just the player, but I think it's just a little rich. And as you've kind of talked about there, JC, with the buyers and sellers we're going to get into, I think it really does kind of show you where the market is as we go into the last week of the trade deadline.
I mean, that can be an indication, or it can't. For some teams and for some players, prices are higher depending on the situations. And, one situation being if they have more than a year left, if they're more than a rental, then their price is going to be a little bit higher. If their cap hits a little bit lower, that could maybe drive up their price a little bit. So it's going to be, hard to see, especially because other teams, depending on what kind of a race they're in and what kind of a need they're in, if you're looking for, a top six winger, and that at least one other team that you're in competition with is looking for that player, then the price is going to be higher. So there are going to be a lot of different factors, especially getting up to deadline day. What's going to determine what, but I don't know that I don't think we're going to see any sort of a record-setting year. I know, Spencer, you mentioned trade deadlines past. I remember watching the entire day and it being exciting for the entire day. You just like every few minutes, it's like, okay, we have another alert to tell you about. Another trade has come down. And then now in the last few years, it's been so boring. It's been just awful. So I don't think we'll see like 40 trades or anything like that. It might be quiet. But the one thing that's going to be interesting is knowing next year the NHL salary cap floor is coming up. I think it's coming up to 76 or 79 million. So it's going to be a very high cap. So all of a sudden, the idea of tanking gets harder and harder for teams now. So I think it just makes a more competitive product. But at the same time, you're going to see teams still have a need to spend money. So, it could make things interesting just knowing that that's going to be part of the decision making.
Now, I don't know who's still got dead cap running around, but I can only imagine Carey Price being traded for the 4th time, Shea Weber being traded for the 8th time, Marian Hossa. I think his contract's finally over, but he may get traded for the 9th time with that, with his skin condition that made him forcibly retire and have his money just passed around to get to salary floors for Arizona, formerly now obviously Utah and what have you. But JC, I do want to now talk about some of the teams we've kind of alluded to, in that there's a lot of parity this year in the NHL. Normally, and again, there's a couple, you mentioned Vancouver, Calgary, they're kind of out of it right now. In the East, the Devils are really that team that are kind of out of it. But like, even from the Devils, who have 60 points right now, to the Boston Bruins in the last wildcard spot, it's 11 points. That's not insurmountable. That's with 22 games roughly left in the season, that's a not ridiculous amount of points to make up. And, you still got the Florida Panthers, who've got 2 straight cup rings, who are missing their 2 best players, and Matthew Tkachuk, who's played all of 13 games this season for them, and Alexander Barkov, who hasn't played and won't play this season. He's been done since the summer. We knew that coming in. I believe he has a knee injury that's kept him out all season long. So you can't really lose your 2 best players and think, man, we're going to be anywhere near the same team, and they haven't been. The Leafs trade away Mitch Marner, and not saying Mitch Marner's just the reason. There's a lot of reasons going on in Toronto why they haven't been very good, but losing a 100-point player, it just shows how important he was to that offense in that group as just an athlete, let alone obviously Sheldon Keefe and his style, I guess, if you could say, compared to Craig Berube, who I know has created a lot of fans in Toronto, JC, a lot of fans in Toronto. You mentioned Ottawa. They're only, I believe, 5 points back right now of Boston. You also you got Columbus there. You got Washington there, all fighting for those wild card spots. Right now, Boston and Montreal have the wild card spots. So kind of looking at the Eastern Conference first, obviously, as I'm a Bruins fan and you're an Ottawa fan, which teams do you think are going to be buyers, going to be sellers, or are you more interested in thinking most teams are probably going to try to stay pat and then, not make any big splashes?
I think it really depends on what a team's needs are. So if you're looking at a team like Toronto, you don't have a lot of picks in the next few years. You don't have a number 1 pick in the next couple of years. So honestly, you're looking at that situation and going, we need to start filling the cupboard back up again. And I mean, just based on where they're at this year and coming out of the Olympics, 0-4. Yeah, they're probably going to be sellers. But I mean, for the other teams, you can take the stand pat approach. This is assuming you don't have any upcoming UFAs that you don't want to have to deal with, or any paydays you're trying to avoid. If you don't have anything like that and you honestly think that you're still in it, so if you're Philly, if you're Columbus, if you're Washington, yeah, you're probably going to stand pat, or maybe pay a little bit if you really honestly believe that your team is going to be a wild card team at the very least. Honestly, it depends on, number one, teams looking at their schedule. 22 games is it's not much. It's a quarter of a season still left to go. But if you look at your schedule and you go, man, we've got a nightmare of a schedule where it's going to be tough to win games, that maybe you're not as inclined to spend and be a buyer. But if you look at your schedule and it's favorable, and you know that you're relatively healthy, as a lot of guys just played to be in the Olympics, if you're relatively healthy, you got your best guys going, then you're probably more inclined to spend. So it's really a lot of these teams taking a look at those last 22 games and figuring out, can we be competitive down this stretch? And if so, if we think we're going to be one of the best, then we might want to open up the wallets a bit.
Now, obviously, Buffalo right now in the Atlantic playoff line. They're currently tied for second in the Atlantic with the Detroit Red Wings, a part of the top tier teams. And I'm kind of interested to see what Buffalo does, just because obviously they've kind of caught lightning in a bottle. They started off the season not very good, pretty horrible for the Buffalo Sabres, and then really turned it around and have been one of the hottest teams in hockey the last 3 months, basically, since they fired their GM, Kevin Adams, and how much of an impact hiring promoting Jarmo Kekalainen as their new GM, I don't exactly know. I would almost say none, but in reality, that was the quote-unquote catalyst. That was the moment when the season turned around for the Sabres. Now they are in the playoff race and look to be a playoff team in the Atlantic for the first time, and I believe it is it 16 seasons? It may be a little bit less than that, but right now they have the longest playoff drought of any NHL team, which is kind of insane, but they look to break that this season. I'm interested to see what they do, as they're right now linked with Robert Thomas of the St. Louis Blues, which I think is an interesting move if they're able to make that work. And then looking at some other teams, obviously we talked about the Leafs, and I've heard a lot of Leaf fans demanding that they make a deal, demanding that they do trade away, insert name here that isn't Matthews, Nylander, or Nyes. And I've heard Nick Waugh's name thrown around, Bobby McMahon's name thrown around. I've heard Morgan Riley's name thrown around if you can get a good enough deal for him. There really isn't a whole lot of names safe right now in Toronto, and you can understand why. The team has not performed well this season, and it's been a continuation of obviously their playoff ineptitude, if you will, throughout the last almost decade now, it feels like. So, they're going to be another team to really watch in the Eastern Conference, are the Toronto Maple Leafs, to see what they do and who they do sell, because Brad Treliving has done nothing so far. And if he does do something and doesn't get a attractive return to the fan base, JC, I can almost guarantee you're going to hear a lot of not just fire Treliving, because I'm already hearing that now, but also that he panicked, that he waited too long, kind of sat on his wallet and realized, oh no, the wallet ain't there. I drove halfway to Ottawa and I don't got my wallet. So I'm technically driving without a license and waiting to get pulled over. So I'm, curious to see what the Toronto-based club does, and obviously what the Buffalo-based club does, because again, they're on the opposite side of the spectrum of, they're a team that I'll say I didn't expect to be here. I can only imagine you didn't expect them to be tied for second in the Atlantic. So they're going to be teams that are surprising people with who they decide to deal for or deal away in their buying and selling operations. Now onto the Western Conference, where things are just as tight from the top three teams out of the playoffs and the first team in the playoffs in the wild card. There's 4 points difference, 66 to 62. So there's still a lot of figuring out to do between these two sides in the Western Conference. And obviously getting hot at the right time. Edmonton's already made a deal. They already traded for Tristan Jarry well into the season for Stuart Skinner, JC. So what are kind of your feelings looking at the Western Conference in particular? Obviously, you got the juggernauts of the Colorado Avalanche, the Dallas Stars, and even Minnesota after trading for Quinn Hughes from Vancouver. When you look at some of the other teams, some of the Pacific teams like Edmonton and Vegas and some of those wildcard teams that are right now in the mix, like the Mammoth and the Oilers, ironically, because the Ducks have jumped in and the Kraken have jumped in. Who do you look at maybe as the top buyer in the Western Conference? And you can't say Vegas because we all know Vegas buys. That's just what they do.
Yeah, for some of these teams, I mean, they're gonna have trouble, especially running up against the cap. So some of them, as much as they would like to add, may not have the ability to do so. But I have to imagine Anaheim's got some space right now that they're playing with. So they might be somebody that can go out and acquire a big name. I would be interested to see, too, what Seattle can possibly do because, again, they might have a little bit of room to work with. And then a surprising team like Utah all of a sudden, you have to imagine that they probably got some draft capital and some young talent in the pipeline that they might be willing to part with in order to make a bigger move this year, especially with a new fan base that you're still working with. If you can have some success in the postseason, you can really make some dollars and really make some headway in that market. So they might be somebody that is possibly a surprising buyer, but they also might spend quite a bit of that future capital in order to try to go for it now. Looking down the standings, I would be interested to see if a team like LA is going to do much, especially after just firing their coach. And now you're going to DJ Smith, which as a Senators fan, I can say good luck with that. I'm sure he'll be great. I'm sure he's not just an interim until you can find a real coach. But all of a sudden, just because of that factor, I think that almost maybe signals that LA is not going to necessarily be a buyer, but I think that still leaves room for San Jose and Nashville. Obviously, San Jose really likes what they've seen, and they're way ahead of schedule. So I think that they're probably going to look at their situation and maybe not do anything just because they're like, hey, we're playing with house money here as it is. Our rookies are developing a lot faster than what we expected we would get from them. So you don't want to sacrifice any future. You just want your kids to keep winning. And so they might just let them keep doing that because having seen young teams that are on the bubble in a race like this before, it means a lot more if they, are given the confidence to do it on their own with what they got, as opposed to we parachuted in some help at the last minute to get you guys over the line. So San Jose might stand pat.
Now, a couple things you said there, JC, that really kind of perked my ears. The big one is LA because they just traded for Artemi Panarin from the New York Rangers. So they just made a deal to get better, to try to make their way into the wild card. They then fire Jim Hiller and hire DJ Smith as an interim head coach. Who knows if that becomes permanent? If they make the playoffs, you have to assume it becomes permanent, but they have to get that far, JC. And again, they're still 4 points out. So they have to, kind of make that room. But do they make another move? Because again, this is, from everything we've heard, Anze Kopitar's last year. This is his swan song. This is his last season as their captain and as one of the best players in the NHL, at least in my opinion, especially easily the best Slovenian player ever. Do they try to make one more kick at the can for their captain before they start trying to add some assets? And they also lost a big part of their offense, their top six, in Kevin Fiala at the Olympics, who injured himself with that collision with Tom Wilson, which looked completely incidental to me. Like it was, an intentional hit by Tom Wilson, but the injury was completely bizarre. Like it's hard to see where it happened. And I kept rewatching it, trying to see where I think happened, what I think happened. Again, I'm not a medical professional. I won't speculate here. I speculated in my own living room, but other than that, are they a team that's going to buy? I'm curious. The Sharks, another interesting team. Again, as you mentioned, they're way ahead of schedule. Will Smith, Macklin Celebrini's become one of the best players in the NHL easily, not just because he's one of the best defensive players, but because his offense is just shot up the NHL point leaders. He's still top 5 right now after the Olympics, where he became one of the best players on the Canadian team when he's playing with Nathan MacKinnon and Connor McDavid on the best line at the entire tournament. So that team is a weird one because I assume, as you're right, they're probably going to stand pat. But what if they go, you know what? I like these young guys. We can get rid of some other young guys we don't necessarily think are going to fit in, try to add a little bit. And a team that I do think is going to end up selling, and I think they're going to sell high, is the Nashville Predators. They were the big buyers at last year's free agency. They got Steven Stamkos. They got Ryan O'Reilly. They got a couple other guys to join Philip Forsberg and Roman Josi. And last year, they were horrible. They were one of the bottom 5 teams in the NHL. It did not work for Barry Trotz. This year, they're a lot closer to the playoff line, but still not there. Barry Trotz ends up resigning as the GM of the Nashville Predators. And I assume you saw the rumors too. Steven Stamkos had his alleged who he'd waive his no trade clause to. The Lightning were in there. I think the Wild were in there. Then he came out and said, "That's absolutely not true. I never said I'd waive my no trade clause." From Ryan O'Reilly, I don't know if he'd waive his no trade clause. I'm implying he has one. I assume they'd keep Philip Forsberg and Roman Josi because they're veteran players, tenured players with that team, but maybe they get a great offer for Josi. Maybe they get a great offer for Philip Forsberg and they do decide to move off, because does Nashville really think that their old roster, only getting older, is going to be able to continue this to sustainability? I don't know. And I'll be honest, if Edmonton still thinks their goaltending is an issue and you don't want to spend 4 first-round picks on Connor Hellebuck out of Winnipeg, I mean, UC Saros hasn't been good this year for Nashville, but he was great for Finland at the Olympics after the first game. And we all know how good UC Saros is when he's on his game. So do you make a swing for UC Saros on what's been a down year, maybe at a buy low, sell high kind of move? I'm kind of interested. I think they're really going to be the team that may be just like Nazem Kadri with the Flames. They may be the team where you kind of pin and go, there's 3 guys on that team I think could be traded. If any one of them goes, if the Lightning get Stamkos, if the Wild get Stamkos, or Ryan O'Reilly goes somewhere, like back to Buffalo for some ungodly reason or whatever, right? Like that could really be the turning point for one of those other franchises where they're able to really go from good team to great team, or great team to, real title contender. And I think that's where those teams have to really decide, in my opinion, at this point, seller's market, what are these guys worth to us and what are we willing to give up for them? And, the Predators, again, I'm so interested to see what they do with Stamkos and O'Reilly, and even, guys I love like Josi and Forsberg.
Yeah, I think they probably need to think about moving away from those guys if you can move them, if you can find landing destinations for them, which, I mean, you've got some guys that are kind of long in the tooth there. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly, you're looking at age 35, $4.5 million cap hit. Got 1 year left on his deal. I'm sure you can find somebody that would want maybe some veteran leadership for a playoff run, but who's got the cap space? And now, I mean, the NHL has obviously cracked down on that a little bit more, so it's going to be a little bit harder for teams like the Vegas Golden Knights to all of a sudden have all these guys just show up in the playoffs. Oh, look at that. Ta-da. Same with the Florida Panthers. I'm looking at you. So, yeah, I mean, some of these contracts might be tough to move for Nashville. Michael Bunting's another guy that might be up as well with a $4.5 million cap hit and being a UFA next year as well. So we'll see. I'd be interested to see if Jordan Binnington lands somewhere because obviously St. Louis had been hoping that he would have had a successful run in the Olympics, and I think he arguably did. I mean, he didn't win gold, but I think he still proved, okay, so he can be successful on good teams in high-pressure situations. So I think I predicted on this show earlier this year that Binnington to Edmonton was a possibility, and I still kind of believe in that, if Edmonton is going out and looking for a goalie, depending on what the prices will be, Binnington might be the one that's a little more budget friendly compared to what you're going to have to give up than anybody else, just because he has not had a good season. So you're really hoping that somebody is going to spend based on what they saw in that really small window of the Olympics. But yeah, otherwise interesting. I mean, all eyes I think will be on Edmonton just to see what they do. That's always the curious one. And it's certainly known that a goaltender is needed there. For the other Canadian teams that are right now looking at a playoff spot, Montreal, I think, they're a team that moves the puck so fast. I think that they have probably a few things they're looking at, and probably the biggest one would be just more veterans in what's a pretty young team right now. You've got a lot of young studs on that team, especially with Nick Suzuki and Demidov and some of these guys that Cole Houston, like just incredible players. But just to have that veteran leadership in the room, especially someone with a resume that maybe includes having won a Stanley Cup before, that might be big for Montreal to add. So I think that might be something that they look for. And maybe it's a Ryan O'Reilly in that case, just because he's still obviously a hard-nosed competitor, but he would be able to pass on something to those kids on Montreal. So that might be what Montreal's looking for. And then, I mean, there really aren't many other Canadian teams that are in the mix right now. So can't tell you what they're looking for other than just a really nice lottery pick.
Oh, and they're resort in Cancun and or Mexico at this point. I will also mention that you can never have enough centers to win face-off draws, clutch in the playoffs. That's why the Habs went back after Philippe Deneau and required him from the LA Kings earlier this season. But with a couple minutes left, JC, I do want to just ask you flat out, looking at the players we've heard rumored out, Kadri, Robert Thomas, obviously Binnington you kind of mentioned there. If there was one guy you believe is going to be moved before Friday's deadline crosses, who would you believe that one player is going to be? And obviously, if you have a landing spot for them, please go ahead.
Probably for sure, Bobby McMahon is probably gone from Toronto. As for a landing spot, I'm not sure. I think he's got such a cap-friendly hit that I wouldn't be surprised if Edmonton ends up being the destination for Bobby McMahon.
I mean, honestly, Pittsburgh could be too, because, you know, we all know Kyle Dubas loves his guys, man. He loves his guys, and he already, in my opinion, fleeced Colorado for the Samuel Girard and a second for Brett Kulak. I thought that was such a steal, even though I know Girard's paid a little bit too much money. I think a second-round pick, again, acquiring that money on a team that isn't cap-strapped, not going to be when Evgeny Malkin's 42 and Crosby's on his last legs and, you know, what have you. I think that team is definitely going to be pretty safe cap-wise. For me, I do think it's going to be Robert Thomas. Now, if it is the Sabres, I don't know. I just don't know what the Sabres are willing to give up at this point to get a guy like Robert Thomas, who I do rather like, even though he's a former Londonite, which makes me kind of want to vomit. Other than that, I think he's a great player, and I think he'll fit right in with that Sabres team. And obviously, they'd love to add to catch this lightning in a bottle. But I do think it's Robert Thomas. And if it's not the Sabres, I mean, does Minnesota decide to go, you know what, this is our year, we got Quinn Hughes, we're just going to go all out and pick a guy like Robert Thomas and go, even though the division rival, the Blues may ask for an even bigger premium, they're willing to give it up because Bill Guerin's not scared to make a deal. He cut Zach Parise and Ryan Suter for a reason to catch all that dead cap. He wants to win and wants to win now, and I think he's definitely a guy that's going to be very aggressive at this year's deadline, JC, is a guy like Bill Guerin.
Yeah, and he should be too. You've seen success already, and you're trying to continue it. And for Bill Guerin, I think he is a guy that probably should be aggressive at the deadline this year.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
With Rogers TV, you can cheer on the home team from the comfort of your living room. We'll head to the rink, the field, the court, or the pitch, so you don't have to. Tune in and cheer on your local amateur athletes on Rogers TV.
Hello, your telephone. How can I help?
Adults
I need
must be 18
somebody,
to enter.
not just anybody. Won't you please?